I just want to make sure that we do have lots of time at the end for questions and discussion. So welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Stevie J. Tardy, Endowment Fund, and I have the absolute pleasure of chairing this virtual learning cafe, which we're delivering in collaboration with the Centre for Justice Innovation. And what a session that we have in store. Obviously, I look forward to every single one of our virtual learning cafes, but I have to be honest that I have been especially excited about this one. I was reflecting yesterday, I joined the Youth in and I think I've probably had more conversations about Outcome 22 than anything else. And if that diversion is a priority for us, and that's because on average, diversion is likely to have a research suggests that it can reduce reoffending by 13%. And you can find out more information about diversion. A link, if it's not been posted, will go in very soon. However, we also know from research that so please keep an eye out for that. What we know from that research is that there can be a myriad of issues and barriers of diversion. Specifically for Outcome 22, this can range from patchy understanding about exactly all the way up to the police crime outcomes framework, which can disincentivize forces and individual offers. And that's why it brings us to today and why it is so important that we can devote the time and space, how it can be implemented effectively. And that's why I'm delighted that we have colleagues from Merseyside on the call with excellent speakers who will all present in turn. They're going to present for around 45 minutes, and I take my chairing duty.
Stevie, I'm so sorry, but your sound keeps cutting out.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. Do you have
Yeah.
headphones with a mic?
Uh, oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, maybe also if you try and turn your camera off so it's less strain on your internet if it's an internet connection issue.
Yeah, I've tried that. Sorry, all. Let me just try turning that off as well. So in terms of the session, we have three excellent speakers. As I said, I'll try and keep them to 45 minutes, which should hopefully leave plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. What I will say is during these presentations, if you've got comments, questions, things you'd like to share from practice, resources, please do post them in the chat and we will try and navigate and respond to those as soon as possible. So without any further delay, let me pass on to the first speaker, which is Bami, who's a Senior Innovative Practice Officer from the Centre for Justice Innovation. Bami, over to you.
Thanks, Stevie. Hello, everyone. So I'll just give a bit of background about the centre before I get started. So the Centre for Justice Innovation is a UK-based charity, and we work to ensure that the justice system is fair and effective for those who enter it. And we do that by really championing the voices of practitioners and evidence-based best practice. And so we've been fortunate enough to partner with the Youth Endowment Fund with their Youth Justice Partnership to work with youth justice services and police around diversion. And one of the main things we've been hearing when we've been working with youth justice services and police is around Outcome 22, what is it? How does it work in practice? There's a lot of things that we feel, there's a few kind of common misconceptions we found around Outcome 22, which has led to many people, mostly police forces, being a bit skeptical about using it. So we thought it would be great to kind of have an opportunity to discuss it. And obviously, colleagues from Merseyside will talk about what they do in practice. But what I'll be doing today is just kind of talking about what we know about Outcome 22, some of the things that we've been asked, or some beliefs that we've, come across as we've been speaking with practitioners about Outcome 22. and then hopefully we can answer some questions in the end. Next slide, please. So, and I know that a lot of people probably gone through the guidance, religiously, but I just really think it's important to just kind of reiterate what's in the National Police Chiefs Council guidance on outcome 22. So it is an outcome code. So it's a Home Office outcome code, which is intended to reflect where diversionary intervention has been used to resolve a case that does not meet the public interest test to take any further action. It is an informal outcome that results in an NFA, so no further action for the use of both adult and youth cases. So obviously, in this situation, we are talking about youth cases. And so currently, it's not seen as a positive outcome for police forces. So it doesn't show that they have detected a crime essentially, which is one of the reasons why there's not been a lot of uptake with outcome 22 with some police forces. But given the positive benefits from effective diversionary work, even though it might be seen as not positive detection, it shouldn't deter forces from using it, because we know that it's having the impact, and we know the importance of collecting that data around people receiving some sort of intervention or some sort of diversionary action away from the justice system. So it can be used as a formal out-of-court resolution, as an alternative to a formal out-of-court resolution or prosecution. So it really sits alongside out-of-court resolutions, and it is that kind of informal aspect. So it also, it means that the child that receives an outcome 22, they need to complete some sort of diversionary activity, and it needs to meet the evidential threshold. So if, the child does not engage, in some cases, the police can enforce a formal disposal outcome. Really important to note that it does not require an admission of guilt or an acceptance of responsibility. That's where it differs from an informal out-of-court resolution like a community resolution, or other formal out-of-court resolutions like a youth caution or youth conditional caution. And we've noticed as well that some areas really struggle with this idea that, a child can receive this kind of intervention without having to admit guilt or accept responsibility. But we really want to point out that, outcome 22 was kind of birthed out of the Lammy Review, which found that people from ethnic minority backgrounds, particularly Black people, are less likely to give a guilty plea when given that opportunity. So it's an opportunity to give people who were not likely to admit guilt or accept responsibility because of the implications of the justice system, that opportunity to receive some sort of intervention. So once again, it should not be used where there's no rehabilitative diversionary, I don't know why I've written educational twice, or intervention activity taking place. It's really important to note that I've actually come across areas where they want to offer an outcome 22, but only if the child is already engaging with social care, for example. It's not necessarily thought that it can happen at any point, but it's important that at the time of closing the case, the child has had some sort of rehabilitative diversionary or some sort of intervention activity. Next slide, please. And also just to note, we know that there are some kind of conversations around making outcome 22 a positive outcome. We know that this is currently sitting with the Home Office, and we know that the Ministry of Justice are also looking into the code of practice around this, so around the framework. So we know that there is going to be a lot of change possibly in the future, but as it stands now, it's not positive detection. So I just thought it would be important to talk about admissions. So like I mentioned before, there's no requirement for that admission of guilt, acceptance of responsibility. But that doesn't mean that, the evidential test doesn't have to be met. It does need to be met. And in the cases where the child, doesn't engage, the police do have that power to enforce a formal disposal outcome. So this is where it differs from those formal outcomes. But, if an admission has been made, at the beginning, there could be an opportunity to charge. So it's really important to note that outcome 22 isn't just for children who do not give an admission of guilt or do not accept responsibility. It can also be for children who admit guilt at the beginning of, work, having that contact with the police. So it's not just specifically just for children who don't, but it's good to have that opportunity for those who, wouldn't give that admission to still access that diversionary activity. Next slide. So it's really important as well to note that outcome 22 and deferred prosecution or deferred charge, deferred caution, they are not the same thing. So we have to remember that outcome 22 is an outcome code, whereas deferred prosecution is an actual process. So all deferred prosecutions should be closed as an outcome 22, but not all outcome 22s are deferred prosecution. So, you know, it doesn't, just because someone has received an outcome 22 doesn't necessarily mean that they are on a deferred prosecution scheme. So deferred prosecution schemes are a non-statutory disposal whereby the police have the option to put on hold prosecution or caution until a diversionary activity has been undertaken. And once again, the evidential threshold has to be met. So in the case where, you know, the child doesn't engage or hasn't been compliant, they can be given, you know, they can go to court or they can receive a caution. Whereas with outcome 22, that's a no further action. If the child doesn't engage, if the child you know, isn't necessarily compliant, there is opportunity to just kind of leave it as it is and leave it as a no further action. But once again, as well, even with the deferred prosecution schemes, you do kind of have to look at it as a case by case basis, just because there can be an opportunity to prosecute or to you know to receive a caution doesn't mean that that has to happen. Once again, you know, looking at the case by its merits and you know whether there can be more opportunities to engage with that child to ensure that they don't end up going to court, because ultimately that's what we want. Outcome 22 is the opportunity to kind of divert away from the justice system as much as possible. So it shouldn't really be used as like a way to kind of escalate a child through the justice system. Next slide. And I also thought it'd be great to kind of just talk a bit about outcome 22 versus community resolution, just because we have spoken with some areas who kind of say, well, if we're going to use outcome 22, is there any point of even using a community resolution? What is the point of, you know, having both options at our disposal? It's really important to note that community resolution, you know, is a non-statutory disposal that does require an acceptance of responsibility, and it's also voluntary as well. So there's no requirement to have that diversionary activity. So that's where it's different to outcome 22 in the sense that outcome 22 doesn't require that acceptance of responsibility, but also, you know, that child does have to have some sort of intervention, does have to have some sort of action that takes place. So it has a bit more teeth than a community resolution, because a community resolution, you can't enforce, you know, that work with a child. Though the child can do some work, it is very much voluntary. And if the child decides not to engage, they don't want to, you know, they don't want to comply with any conditions or anything that's put on them, they don't have to. So it's really important to note where they kind of sit and where it's quite different. Because for some people, that requirement to accept responsibility is still quite a heavy thing for them, and they might not want to do that. So, you know, it's different in that sense. Next slide. But also as well, just to note as well, before I forget, community resolutions also don't capture the interventions that are taking place, if there are interventions. So outcome 22 does offer that opportunity for us to have that rich data about, you know, who's having these interventions and, you know, what is the outcome of that. Whereas with a community resolution, we're less likely to know, you know, how many children are receiving an intervention with a community resolution. So, you know, where possible, it does make sense if the child suits the eligibility criteria for outcome 22 to have an outcome 22 rather than community resolution. Next slide. So I'm just going to go through common misconceptions, and I do apologize once again to Stevie for this slide and all the multiple times you're going to have to click. So once again, I just want to go through the fact that, you know, it does not require admission of guilt or acceptance of responsibility. We have worked with some areas where, you know, they really struggle with this. And even in their guidance for outcome 22, we will hear them still say that the child is required to admit guilt or accept responsibility. But essentially, when you do that, straight away, it is not an outcome 22. You should not close the case as an outcome 22 because that child has had to admit guilt or accept responsibility. It's not to say that a child that does have an outcome 22 hasn't admitted guilt or accepted responsibility for the offence, but it's not a requirement. So it's just really important to note that and make sure that the children that you're working with are aware of that. Yep, so the evidential test must be met. So yeah, and I'll kind of touch on that with another point as well. Next one, outcome 22 is not only for Black and mixed heritage children. We have had this, and I know some people might be like, what? But we have had this come up quite a lot with people like, well, we think it's unfair that, you know, only Black and mixed heritage children can access this. What about other children? No, it's for all children, but it is in response to the fact that Black people and people of different ethnic minorities are less likely to give that guilty plea or admission of guilt in the justice system because of their lack of trust in the justice system. So it is in response to that, but it's not only for people from those backgrounds. Next. It's not for children who've completely denied any involvement in the offence. Once again, we've heard this quite a lot, you know, people feeling uncomfortable with the idea of giving a child this outcome when, you know, they kind of say, I wasn't there, you know, I don't know anything about this offence. They've kind of denied all kind of involvement. We're not speaking about those kind of children because, you know, in that case, and if the evidential test hasn't been met, you know, it doesn't make sense to give them outcome 22. It would make sense to give them another outcome. But these are for the children that, you can work with them around the offence. There is enough evidence to say that, you know, they did commit this offence. Next one. So non-admission does not mean an increase in risk. So once again, just because a child has not admitted guilt doesn't mean that you can't do the necessary risk assessment. And this is why it's really important that the police and youth justice service really work together around that assessment and that kind of joint decision making around what the outcome is going to be for the child, because you can really assess the risk there and actually understand, you know, what intervention is best placed for the child. Because also if the child does admit guilt, you know, they're still going to have that same kind of risk assessment. It doesn't mean that there's an increase or decrease in risk. It's really just important for the youth justice service and the police to really make the appropriate call on that with the right assessment. Next, non-admission also does not mean a lack of remorse. So we have had some areas, some police forces in particular really struggle around this because they believe in order for a child to meaningfully engage with an intervention, they need to show some sort of remorse, they need to admit guilt. And, you know, this isn't anywhere in legislation for children. And also, you know, when we look at what the evidence says, you know, guilt does not necessarily reflect in how someone engages with an intervention or whether or not they, you know, will have guilt later on in the process. And that's the whole point of working with the child and providing that diversionary opportunity, because maybe in time remorse can be worked with. But also if the child does, you know, never shows remorse, that doesn't mean that they won't engage with the intervention. It might just mean that they don't feel sorry for the offence, and that might be unfortunate in some cases, but that doesn't mean that, you know, they can't be worked with. So it's just really important to not be too fixated on that, which is something that we found at times when we're working with areas. Next. So it can be used when the child is not engaged with other services. I touched on that earlier on in the slides. I've heard of a police force that mentioned that, you know, they would only offer outcome 22 if the child was already engaging with social care, for example. And, you know, that's not what the guidance says. It can be sort of any kind of relevant agency that the child can engage with after. So it can be agencies within the community. It can be, you know, social care, it can be education, but it's not specifically just for those children who are already engaging with services, because, you know, that means a lot of children wouldn't meet that threshold. So it's important that, you know, we open it up to as many children as possible. Yeah, it's not a tool to opt out children. So it shouldn't kind of be used as like an escalatory tool. So if the child has received multiple community resolutions, you then go on and say they should have an outcome 22. It's really a case-by-case basis and really looking at, you know, the root of the offending behavior and what would actually benefit the child in that case. So yeah, it shouldn't be used to opt out children. And like I mentioned, I do believe that outcome 22, it does have teeth. It does require a bit more effort than, say, you know, a community resolution, because there is the opportunity to charge if, you know, the evidential test has been met. But, you know, it isn't to say that that means that it should be used just because you can later on charge if the child doesn't engage. There should be a lot of meaningful activity to ensure that the child is engaging with the intervention. Next, yeah, and similarly, it should just work alongside it. Out of court resolutions shouldn't replace it. Next, yeah, not all outcome 22s are deferred prosecution. Just really want to make that clear. Just because there is a distinct difference. And I do know that, there has been talks around making deferred prosecution have a separate outcome code, just because there has been that slight confusion. But as it stands, deferred prosecution still will have to be closed as an outcome 22, but they're not one in the same, they're not interchangeable. And it's really important that if you are recording a case as an outcome 22, you're making it clear if it's a no further action or if it's a deferred prosecution, and really explaining the rationale behind that. Next one. So yeah, not all children who do not engage need to be prosecuted. Similarly, as I've been saying, it's really important that in that assessment process, you're looking at what can really benefit the child in terms of the intervention that they receive, and also their family backgrounds, their offending history, all the different things that come into play. That can dictate a child's offending behavior, just to ensure that we're not setting up children to fail, essentially. But also, if there is enough evidence to then prosecute and the child hasn't been engaging, what other opportunities are there? Can the child be referred back to joint decision-making panel for, another disposal? Do they have to go to court? Just being aware of the different options available. And lastly, outcome 22 is not a soft option. So this is something that we're hearing quite a lot as well. People kind of feeling like, how are we going to explain that a child has been given an outcome 22 to victims? How do we explain this to our community? It feels like we're just hand-holding. They're given an opportunity to do something where they're not having to admit guilt or accept responsibility. We have heard a lot of comments around that. But, like I said before, outcome 22 does have teeth. It does, if the child doesn't engage, there is an opportunity to charge. And also, it requires that work in comparison to community resolution. The child has to, engage with some sort of intervention. They have to take part in something. They have to have that kind of assessment. They have to, be referred to youth justice service. It's much more effort and work than, say, a community resolution or just a plain old no further action. So it is important to note that there is a lot of effort that will have to take place. But also, when it comes to victims, we really do think it's important that police and any other relevant agency that's working with victims explain to victims, what outcome 22 is, what they can expect from it, and really ensure that, you're meeting the requirements of the victims' code of practice, but you're also, making sure that those who are speaking with victims have the relevant training and guidance so they actually know what outcome 22 is and it can explain it efficiently, and also kind of manage those expectations to know that the victim's voice will be heard in this process, but it doesn't necessarily determine what the outcome is. And yeah, those are the common misconceptions, and I'll hand it back over to Stevie.
Thank you very much. Just checking, can people hear me, or should I turn off the camera again? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Feel free, thanks, Ben. Feel free to just shout if you can't hear me again. So thank you so much, Bami. Let me hand over now to Fleur and Helen. I'll let you introduce yourselves as well, because I feel that that might be more effective with the time. So let me hand over to you both.
Thank you. I don't know whether you kind of want to, there was a couple of things popping up in the chat there, which I don't know whether Bami might want to address before we move on, or whether we want to wait till the end.
I'm happy to wait to the end.
Yeah, we'll wait to the end. We'll take all questions together. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Good afternoon, and really appreciate you giving up your time to be here today. So as the slide says, my name's Fleur Han, and I'm the Youth Justice Lead at the Merseyside Violence Reduction Partnership. And I've been at the partnership now since June of last year, but prior to that, have a youth justice background. And Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Fleur. Hi, everyone. Otherwise known as Fleur's sidekick. often. I'm Helen Walmsley. I'm the sergeant for Merseyside Police's Youth Intervention Unit, or Got No Money, as we all know. So I work closely with every youth justice service in Merseyside, so all five. I supervise the officers in each area, and I work very closely with Fleur's role in the VRP just to try and introduce Plan Merseyside protocols, and it really does benefit us to do that across all five areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can see some questions popping up there. And again, I'll come to those at the end if that's okay, just because I think I might touch on them as we're going through. So I'm going to start off today's portion of this portion of the virtual learning cafe with an overview of our recently introduced no comment pathway. So you will see a theme throughout all of this, that a lot of it is done in a co-creation with the Violence Reduction Partnership, but I know not every area has one. But with our colleagues at the police and the youth justice services, that will be one of the key themes that really joined up working. So this was co-created between ourselves at the VRP, Merseyside Police and Merseyside Youth Justice Services, and it ensures that children are afforded the access to an out-of-court disposal, even if they gave a no-comment interview. And again, I know we've touched on this before, but it was based in research and reports regarding disproportionality. The Lamoury Review was a big, massive one that really spearheaded a lot of this change. And it must either be recorded as an outcome 22 or a charge. We are still very much in the infancy. We've not yet completed a full year of the pilot for the no comment pathway. However, some of the key initial findings are really interesting and you can see them there. But the biggest one for me is the bottom one that stands out. So 100% of the children that were accepted onto the pathway engaged in the intervention. Therefore, one could potentially assume, can anyone else hear me? Someone's just said they've lost sound.
I can still hear you. Let me just check with others.
I can
I
hear
can
you,
hear you
Fleur.
too.
Yeah, others.
Brilliant,
I
thank
think it
you.
might just, yeah.
Okay, which is really positive that they're engaging in the intervention, because we know that that intervention can go on to support assistance, which is kind of why we're all here. So we have safeguards in place to ensure that the right children are coming through on the no comment pathway. And again, it's not just our youth intervention police, but our PDMs have been really influential in this, haven't they, Helen? And ensuring the no comment pathway is really kind of tight.
Yeah, sorry, just for that, that's a police decision maker. We have them
Sorry.
here at Merseyside, so we don't allow it to go just through sergeants of investigators. No comments have to go through our police decision makers, which I appreciate not every force has.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, going to move on to op inclusion now, which is how Merseyside kind of, I suppose, deliver outcome 22s is probably the easiest way of putting it. So again, that's co-created by the Violence Reduction Partnership, Merseyside Police and Merseyside Youth Justice Services back in 2001. And it offers an additional intervention to their already existing out-of-court disposal protocol. So when looking at deferring prosecution, to offer these children a chance to change their behaviour before they enter the youth justice system, giving relevant children opportunities to engage in a needs-led YJS, sorry, not YYS programme, as an alternative to receiving a statutory order and potentially then a criminal record. I know there's been loads of conversation, loads of chats going on, but I will come to them in the end. But I appreciate the being there. I'm just not ignoring anyone just because I'll get thrown off track. The way in which in Merseyside we run Operation Inclusion is that there's a multi-agency panel that meets to agree the eligibility of that child being accepted onto op inclusion, as we call it, having a holistic assessment and report completed with the child, and a plan of intervention agreed with the child and put into care in that panel environment. For anyone who's got experience of YJS orders, it runs very, very, very similarly to a referral order. So kind of have that in your mind, but obviously in the outer court sphere. Next slide, please. Okay. Because the joint Merseyside working protocols is so key, I think it really highlights the importance of that multi-agency working. So there's joint decisions between the police, YJS, health, and other agencies as well. That could be whoever is working with that child. So that's our partners in education, social care, mental health. It can be kind of anyone. And we always try and encourage a positive person to attend the panel with the child and the parent, because we want it to be a positive based opportunity for the child as well. It needs to have an understanding and a shared agreement across all partners, which can be difficult to get to. I understand that, because every agency has competing objectives, competing ethoses at times, but that can really drive the change and really drive the buy-in from other partners then as well. The intervention plan is specific to the assessed needs of that child, so it is far from a one-stop shop of, okay, kids committed X offence, that means they do Y programme, and that happens for every child. It doesn't work like that, and it can't work like that. The final panel meets to agree and sign off, and then that is recorded on police systems. So it won't be signed off until the child has attended that panel with those professionals to agree that they have completed that intervention. It is then signed off. But that creative working ensures real meaningful engagement with the child and family, which improves the outcomes for children and their families as well, which therefore then has a greater impact on social and financial systems in general as well moving forward. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits of Outcome 22 that we on Merseyside see and feel. Offending following engagement with Operation Inclusion is low. I know that chat's about to burst and everyone's go, give me your details, give me your details. The issue I have offering kind of any solid data currently is because I am dealing with 5 local authorities and 5 youth justice services who all record on their own systems slightly differently. So I am waiting for that. However, anecdotally, from a Merseyside perspective, and I'm coming at it from the YJS, I suppose, side, but I know Helen will back me on this, the numbers of children going on to offend post-completion of Operation Inclusion is very, very low. Helen, would you agree with that?
No, certainly. Obviously, it's something we're always mindful in relation to risk, but we are been supporting our figures. It's definitely a reduction from those who would have received a youth caution and above.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Helen. It really supports that relationship-based interventions, which we know through research, but also practice knowledge, is what can affect the most change with children and families. It's delivered in a timely manner. I think one of the recent stats that we've just had through from the YJB, that on average from a child being arrested to appear in court is around 225 days currently. Op inclusion is happening much, much, much quicker, with the child having access to that intervention and often not being drawn in, not sitting there with no intervention, potentially worried sick about what can happen, trauma within the family ongoing, all that intervention and support is there. And as I've said there, it helps reduce first-time entrance, benefiting the child, but also from a reporting perspective from every agency as well. There are financial impacts on services that are reduced because we are getting upstream rather than waiting to deal with these children on statutory orders. It can result in no criminal record for the child if successfully completed. Data from the 1st of Jan to the 30th of June 23 was that out of the 161 who completed their intervention, only 11 went on to offend. That's not as up to date as I would like, but that is the last kind of data set that we do have. And I think something that we're really proud of is that back in November 22, Op Inclusion was successful in winning a Howard League award under their policing and children category, kind of showcasing the work that's been done across Merseyside. Okay, next slide, please. These are just some of the feedback and really trying to capture the voice of the child and the family in terms of Operation Inclusion. So with regards to the child in blue bubble, when asked what they had learned from Op Inclusion, he said that he'd learned a lot. I don't act without thinking now. I will not pick up a knife again. And there's some really powerful statements you can all read, so I'm not going to read them all out to you. Another young person's dad said that the work we've done really helped. It helps him make better decisions as well. And the nan there in the green, he's done a 360 and turned around his life, and he's now working full time. And I think they are just some of the testimonials that we can kind of, I suppose, hang our hats on to say that this can really work and it can really affect change as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so moving forward, I suppose kind of where the VRP, police, YJSs want to drive this forward, and this is going to mainly fall to me and Helen. Sorry, Helen, if any of this is news, but I don't think it is. So with regards to the no common pathway, so back in December, we recently added a further offence of theft, which is suitable for sentence at magistrates court to be considered. We want to do a further analysis of the SEND implications and the outcomes following YJS interventions. So if we've got kids reporting at the time of arrest, reporting that they have SEND needs, how many after intervention have ongoing or queried SEND needs. We're going to explore if the no common pathway is impacting the children that it was intended to, making sure it's being used correctly. And we want to showcase it to other areas as we're doing today, and continue collaborative working with multi-agency teams. So every quarter, myself, Helen, and the police decision maker meet to look at the most recent set of data. That's not to say Helen and I don't meet far more regularly about other things, but that's specifically for that, to make sure we've got a real-time grip on this because it is so new and so fresh. And with regard, to Operation Inclusion, continued analysis of the effectiveness of Op Inclusion, continued work with our partners to improve outcomes for children, driving change when looking at weapons-related offences. I know it's huge for everyone in terms of weapons-related offences, and if we're looking at the government and their pledge to reduce knife crime by half, I think it is really, really out there, and it's something that no one wants to live with in society. So it's what can we do to kind of affect those changes as well. And again, the SEND impact on the cohort, looking at the short and long-term impacts, but also challenges collating the data from several local authorities, which I am currently bashing my head against the wall with, but I think I'm going to always have that feeling when it comes to data. But I think the biggest thing for us is giving children across the whole country access to both the no common pathway and something similar to Operation Inclusion for that area, because we are seeing that it can work and it can really bring together children and families even tighter, but also children's view of professionals, whether that be YJS practitioners, social workers, police. It can really enhance those views of wider society as well, which we know, don't necessarily see the impact today, but moving forward, you will see a greater impact for them as well. And I think that's it. If anyone's got any questions?
Look, could I just run a few things from a police perspective? Because I think might answer some of the questions. So we're very lucky in Merseyside that all 5 of our youth justice services, they have no threshold of what they accept for the out of court disposal panels, the multi-agency panels. So just to explain how we've managed to deliver this, lucky enough our force took Outcome 22 quite early on, with our force crime registrar supportive, and kind of left us to carry on youth processes because everything was going through, pretty much everything goes through to our youth justice services. So the majority of our Outcome 22s don't go through our deferred prosecution. They are usually for first-time POCDs, which would have got a community resolution previously from the panel, but as you said, voluntary interventions afterwards. The way we do that, we actually see the Outcome 22 as the lower option because it's officially an NFA, but we put the child through to a drugs worker, and that's in a slightly different format across youth justice. Some are in-house, some have other agencies to provide in that input, but the child goes to a drugs worker because I know those children are more likely to desist from speaking to a qualified trained youth professional drugs worker than a police officer giving them a telling off as it is for the CRs on the street, community resolutions. So what we do is we don't close the crime until the child is actively engaged with the drugs interventions for those majority of our Outcome 22s. We wait to confirm that this interventions have been successful. If it's a POCD that's admitted and they don't engage, we still have the opportunity to give them a community resolution because we don't want to prosecute unnecessarily, but we obviously will record, youth justice will record non-compliance for any future cases coming through. So it's really given us an extra string to the bow at a lower level, but it's ensuring majority of children are engaging with the drugs workers really effectively. So that's how we use the bulk of Outcome 22. And obviously with Operation Inclusion, that is our deferred prosecution, which has given us the opportunity to not only not criminalise children for things that would have most certainly been youth caution and above, but we've actually had the benefit of, I'd say, putting cases perhaps a little bit lower, but we see significant risk onto a longer programme. For instance, we had a young 14-year-old never come through to youth justice recently, but the domestic violence in the home address against his mother was considerable. and we put him straight to Operation Inclusion. Appreciate we had a crime of a Section 39 assault, but we needed that really positive engagement, the risk that was contained there, and we needed that longer term programme. So that's how we will use it in that way. So some of the challenges for us have been, you've got to bear in mind statutory time limits on prosecutions. We do seem to make that work with common sense approach, and most of them are cases that don't get hit by statutory time limits, but it is a consideration for the police because we don't ask the officer to lay information at court to stay that time. Also, just regarding the offending, the comments that were made, we've actually been looking at, I'm not allowed to say re-offend because they're not officially offended, but after they've successfully completed Operation Inclusion, we will look at even the out of court disposals if they come through to IGS again. We're keeping an eye on all of it because there's still risk there. Yes, we can track after matrix, we can still go back to use other out of court disposals, but we are recording those to really see the impact and the effectiveness of our preferred prosecution, because we do need to understand that. And I appreciate obviously that it's a conviction for use if it's spent, but we do still obviously advise children, it could come up on a DBS check, anything could, so we do fully explain that. And I think the biggest fear for the police in using our deferred prosecution is knife crime. We've used it, very much a fear won't be used, often won't be diverted in 16 and above because of legislation guidelines, but we have seen some real benefits from using it and really positive outcomes. It is a risk. CPS we have had the challenge of CPS saying we've lost a first strike, but we do put a lot of work into that to explain to our scrutiny panels what has gone on. There's a lot more work gone on, and we've seen some real benefits in relation to that, but we'd only ever use it for weapons offences where there's no harm caused. So that's kind of the challenges we've had in house, isn't it, Fleur? We managed consistently. I say we've very much, especially what's happening in Southport, very much had that pull back from anything over 16, except in amazingly exceptional circumstances. But we're seeing some real good diversion of vulnerable youth earlier on, especially if they're being exploited in to hold when there's 18, 19-year-old gang members stood nearby and the police are around. We've seen some real benefit, but we have to have integrity in it, and we're not afraid to remove a child from Operation Inclusion and take them back. We might put them on a caution and let another offence go through on a statutory, but there's got to be integrity and there's got to be confidence to remove the child off if they don't abide, to also gain confidence. But in the same breath, we've had officers who have no further action knife crime because they're citing self-harm, they're not progressing the investigation. On the swing side, we're going out to all our police strands, our investigations, our disruption teams, and we're saying no discretion in relation to knife crime. Trust us to do the right thing, not to criminalise a child, but don't take it upon yourself to assess that the child has other considerations, other vulnerabilities, to not to progress the investigation because they don't get the support that they need otherwise, unless they come through to youth justice. So I don't know if that answers a little bit more about like what we do, and I think that's probably the fears from the police perspective we come across.
I think as well, just to interject, there's something I didn't touch on which I should have done, and I've seen a question, I suppose, in the chat, is around victims and harm people. So for Operation Inclusion, victims are spoken to in the same way that they are for a referral order. So they will have contact if consent is given from a victim officer within the YJS. Their views and feedback is given into the panel, and that forms part of any intervention if they so wish. So whether that be direct restorative justice, shuttle mediation, letters, reparation, all of that is still considered in exactly the same way that it is for a statutory order, and victims and harm people are very much at the forefront of the intervention that takes place as well. Hope that answers that.
Thank you, Fleur and Helen. You are stealing my job a little bit in terms of chairing the questions. I've realised my mic is starting to cut out again, so I will turn off my camera. But thank you so much. And I think there's another couple of questions in there which I think will be really interesting to tease out. What I will just say, if you would like to ask your question rather than posting it in the chat, please just put up your little hand. We will take off we'll unmute you and also put you on camera. So please feel free, if you don't want to post it in the chat, you'd rather just kind of share your views, please do put your hand up. So another question that has come in is, firstly, do you use the child gravity matrix? Hopefully that's a relatively easy one. If you want to say a little bit about how you use it when you use it, that'd be great.
It's used on every out of court case, our police decision makers, and then obviously go through to the out of court leads, and my staff and the YGS out of court lead will consistently use it to part of the assessment. So we will understand where we are when it's coming through to the referral, and I think we don't go away from the gravity matrix with Operation Inclusion. We just feel like we've got further rationale to go for the lower outcome in relation to that, where we would normally be looking at a youth caution.
Fantastic. Bami, did your comment relate to child gravity matrix? Brilliant.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Yeah, I think it's really important to use the child gravity matrix, but also to remember that, it is a guide and it can be used. You don't have to kind of stick to it to a T completely. You can kind of look at the child's, the case behind it and kind of use that kind of professional discretion to ensure that you're giving the best outcome to the child, not just necessarily because of the offence type and the score that they might have received. So I'm really glad to hear that, for example, in Merseyside using outcome 22 for knife offences, because the child gravity matrix, if you looked at it as it is, you wouldn't follow that. So it is important to kind of know the context behind the offence and use the gravity matrix according to that. So
Thank you. Just to say as well, and it was remiss of me, we also do have Claire Ely, who is with Bami, sat next to her there, who is, if I'm correct in remembering, the Head of Criminal Justice Practice at the Centre for Justice Innovation. So thank you very much for joining us, Claire. I'm sure many on the call are familiar. So again, if you've got any specific questions for CGI, please do ask them. We've got another one. So what percentage of cases complete their interventions with outcome 22? What proportion of those fail to complete are then prosecuted? Great question from Oliver. Do you mean generally across like England, Wales, or specific to Merseyside? We'll hand over to both. Okay, great.
Okay. I can't give you a for sure both, but I can give you a ballpark from professional experience and seeing the data coming through in the raw form where people don't complete all the fields within a form and all that business. So the first part of the question was, let me just get it back up so I can help you there. What percentage of cases completed their intervention with an outcome 22? And what proportion of those were prosecuted? Helen, could you touch on the prosecuted one, do you think?
So the majority of like I say, a lot of our outcome 22s are straightforward possession of controlled drug cannabis. So they go straight to IGS. So they're quite simple. So rarely they will be prosecuted. Usually it'll be a case of we'll try and go to community resolution, but we do have the cases where they absolutely fail to engage in assessment, at which point Youth Justice Service can't take it to the panel, and we will then prosecute because we haven't been able to, Youth Justice Service haven't been able to engage them in even the assessment, never mind intervention. So they're the odd ones at the low level that will go to prosecution, often bounce back from court later on, but that's where they have to, obviously we have to prevail from the court to say you must engage. Majority, like I said, I don't want the figures because poor Fleur's banging ahead with 5 wide Youth Justice Services trying to get absolute up-to-date ones, but majority do engage with outcome 22. We are part of a study. I can't actually explain the study. I've been held to, I'm a little bit sworn to secrecy, I don't know why, but we are part of an academic study actually looking at extra interventions at outcome 22 level with first-time possession of controlled drug. And I can say colloquially already, to see if it reduces serious youth violence, I can say already we are seeing a reduction in the youth coming back. The engagement's been fantastic, and the youth are rarely coming back through to us with repeat possession of drugs offences. So we do know it is absolutely working. I'd put my hat on outcome 22 working better than a community resolution by either a police officer on the street or by Youth Justice, because we hold them. The child knows they've not got an outcome until they engage. So it's kind of that carrot and stick at a smaller level for simple outcome 22s, but it is a massive carrot and stick for the deferred prosecution. And those are the ones that we will send back for prosecution if needs be. But we've been successful overall. I'd say we've seen a certain uplift in
I would
engagement.
concur with everything Helen said there as well.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say to bring you in from a national perspective, because you're working across England and Wales, it'd be really good to get your views on that question, Claire and Bami.
Yeah, so nationally we don't know. And part of that problem is because, as Bambi sort of said in our early sort of presentation, is that the outcome 22 used as a deferred prosecution and outcome 22 not used as a deferred prosecution isn't recorded. So we don't know necessarily which ones are which. We don't know. So we can't, I guess, give you national data on the outcomes of children who receive those. Locally, there's some really great data collection, like what we're hearing from Merseyside, but we couldn't give you a national picture.
Yeah.
What we know is that diversion is successful, so keeping kids out of the justice system and the long-term impact it has. So there's reason to believe it is successful, but to have that sort of hard, fast evidence, particularly for outcome 22, we don't have, which is why we really hope that the Home Office, if they do make those changes, again, Bobby spoke about earlier about splitting them out and making them positive outcomes, would help us develop that evidence base and that data that we need to make sure that we can have a bit more scrutiny about outcomes. But at the moment, we can't.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why we really strongly recommend that local areas really think about that when they're doing this work. It's such a key part of being really clear about what you're using it for and recording that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back in a moment and ask some questions about data, which, Fleur, I know is your favourite topic. But Rich Timson has just posted into the chat, and I think, again, this is a really interesting point, which is advice being provided to defence solicitors to ensure they're providing their clients with advice about not going no comment? I know,
Yes.
again, yeah, so that's great locally. Is that, talk us through a little bit more.
Yeah, so there was a lot of support that went in, kind of both part of our centralised court. So Merseyside has one now youth court. We used to have the local areas. We now have just one. So yeah, a lot of work was done by our core team, but also by YJS's, engaging with solicitors, leaflets, police, engaging with them as well to make sure that they were aware of what this was and how it can positively impact children. We still have some slips now and again, but again, it's about those professional working relationships. And especially with the no comment pathway, it is not to override legal advice given by a solicitor. That's not what it's about, but it's there to. We're seeing it in circumstances where either a solicitor hasn't been present, where a parent felt like it's not required, or the child's looked after, that type of thing. So yeah, that is really key, I would say, to the initial success and buy-in for this as well. Because if your local solicitors are aware, they will do everything they can for that kid to access that as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Claire, Bami, from your perspective, again, nationally, I bet you're coming across some really good work in terms of around defence solicitors and appropriate adults, as well as maybe some areas where you think we could be doing more. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, just as kind of Fleur's alluded to, the responsibility does kind of fall on the local area to provide that information to solicitors and, keep them up to date with like what the eligibility criteria is, what it can look like for the child, if they decide to give no comment at interview, but also you're not wanting to, take away that choice to give a no comment, but ensuring that the solicitor is aware that this is an option to them and that if they do give no comment, these are the outcomes. So we do see some areas that are quite good at, having that information available at the police station, or, providing training specifically to solicitors, working with, the duty solicitors to ensure that they know that option is available. But, as we know, solicitors working with children, it's not a specialized area, so it's very unlikely that they're going to have that kind of specialist knowledge around outcome 22. And some solicitors see, any sort of out of court resolution or anything away from court as diversion. So it's just even getting to that point where they understand that there's, this whole world of, taking children away from court. So yeah, the onus does kind of fall on local areas like youth justice staff and police to kind of give that information. But we do know that it is possible, especially if you're seeing the same duty solicitors coming through and representing children.
And I'll just sort of add to that, we've seen really good practice where the youth court team are letting the solicitors and them know at court, because they tend to be the same people, and also the sort of local firms that tend to represent your children or families often. So again, sending them a loaf of leaflet, someone popping in and saying, by the way, we can do a half an hour online for your team if you. But it is obviously an additional job for youth justice services to do on top of their already busy jobs, trying to get everyone on board. So it's some areas have the capacity to be able to do that and some don't. We do know that there's an organisation I'm sure some of you will be aware of, called the Youth Justice Legal Centre, and they're doing lots of training actually for solicitors and about representing children. And there's a particular area, I think they've got one coming up actually, particularly around, and they mentioned sort of diversion and outcome 22 and stuff like that. So again, I guess it's just promoting that organisations like that exist to your colleagues in the legal world, but it is an ongoing. You can't just do it once. You have to constantly do it, because like any job, there's changes in personnel. But that's some of the good practice we've seen. But I mean, it would be great if there was like a national, training offer for solicitors around children. That's a big policy ask, I guess, out there. But what we've got at the moment is that local area constantly refreshing and reminding people of their offer and how it will work.
Yeah, I'm here for those policy calls, Claire. I'm here for that. So Helen, sorry, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say, we've not solved it completely, but we did have quick wins because we asked our youth justice services to create a leaflet explaining out of court disposals that could be given out in custody to appropriate adults and solicitors. And because wasn't any good to come from the police force, I didn't want it to look like we're influential. We also direct the appropriate adults and the children to access Youth Justice Legal Centre for independent guidance. So we have that leaflet there, but most of our children will be voluntarily interviewed. So we've circulated this to investigators to send, especially if it's not happening there and then, like at home on a body-worn camera. It's easy in an email format to send out prior to, but there's still gaps. I know there's still gaps, but what we did do as well is we delivered to the Law Society to help. So they have a cohort, then they can spread it out to other defence solicitors. So we've given them the guidance. I'm not going to say we promote no comment to the Defence to the Law Society, but we give them the guidance in relation to out of court disposals. So we are seeing improved factors, and then like you say, we've got the gatekeeping at the court as well. So we're trying to hit, and we also requested defence solicitors now go to our court liaison group, as well as like police, and I've come to that. So we're just trying to cover all angles really to improve that knowledge. What we do see, Fleur, don't we, the most of our ones for no comment pathway though tend to come in for a supply offence, and I understand why the defence solicitor gives them advice for no comment. It's probably the best advice from a defence solicitor perspective. But then we don't meet the evidential test as a police to prove supply, and it comes to a possession of a controlled drug, which is suitable for out of court disposal. But then you're stuck with the no comment interview. So that's why the no comment pathway often comes to the fore. So perhaps wasn't poor legal advice; it's just the circumstances of the arrest at the time.
Brilliant, thank you, Helen. That was really useful. Lots of concrete examples there. Let me go back to Bami and Claire.
I've just seen a question from Sinead. We have a leaflet on out of court resolutions and what a child can expect, that we also think it's great for like practitioners and solicitors and things like that. We do think it could be like a starting point to also mention outcome 22, because it does kind of explain what that can entail for a child. But we do think there is opportunity for us to also create some sort of leaflet for outcome 22 as well for solicitors, something that could be generated and given out. So definitely watch this space for that. But I think I also see a comment from Oliver around any route to appeal or contest an outcome 22 where a child maintains innocence. Really important to note that outcome 22 is a closing code, so that means that the child would be contesting a no further action, not so they would, if the child decided to, if they were given the option of receiving outcome 22, so they were given a no further action, but there's an option to have some sort of intervention. And if they decided not to, it could also mean that nothing happens. They don't have to necessarily have an intervention. If they're maintaining the instance, they wouldn't even be approached for an outcome 22, because there isn't that kind of
legal process.
So basically it should be that especially if you wanted to do deferred prosecution, that they've met that evidential threshold, that you could charge if even if they maintain their complete innocence, but there's that evidence
That
there.
would be tested at court.
Yeah, so in those cases, I feel like it wouldn't really necessarily apply for an outcome 22 because it just would be in the public interest anyway. I hope that makes sense. And also I noted as well that there was a question earlier on from someone around at what point can an outcome 22 be given? Like, does it have to be that, you know, at the start when the case is first like when the case is first open that they have an intervention? It can be at any point when the intervention starts, but it's how you close the case, just to kind of be really clear that the child has received some sort of intervention, some sort of rehabilitation. But it could be that, you know, maybe when they start working with the child, they're not on that process yet, and then at some point they do. But as long as it's kind of that process has taken place at some point before it's closed.
The way in which it can often, Helen, correct me if I'm wrong here, work best in practice is the child comes through from the police to the YJS. They then screen it to look at what the best potential outcome for that child is going to be. The practitioner, whether that be a case manager or whatever different areas call them, then go out and complete that assessment with the child, bring it back to a professional only panel. They then screen that even further and say, right, okay, suitable for Operation Inclusion, ComRes, YC, YCC, depending. And then that's kind of where it's set. That doesn't mean that it doesn't then change, but very, very rarely does it then change because you know what you're working with then, if that makes any sense. Helen, would you agree?
No, that's certainly the process. So it's anything would have been screened out if there was any concerns regarding admission, because we have to be for the no comment pathway. It has to be a guilty anticipated plea court case that we're confident meets the evidential test. That's why we make sure everyone goes through our police decision making, because a child has the right to their day in court if necessary. Or so we wouldn't, because it's still anything is possible to be disclosed on a DBS check. So we certainly don't want to cut any corners on that. So we have so many gatekeeping situations, and like you say, it comes back to the panel to discuss that. I don't know if it's worth raising here, Fleur, as well. Probably a risk to us. We're here promoting Outcome 22 for our first-time POCDs, straightforward. We have a risk to our area because that's predominant of our Outcome 22, where our 5 youth justice services, because of there's no threshold on what they take, they've obviously come to an understanding when 4 out of 5 would, if it was first time POCD, we did all our checks, there was no other concerns, no other risk, they might not be allocated to a case manager, they might be screened from that first screening and go through to the drugs worker. Now, obviously, with HMIP saying, and there has to be an assessment with every case, that's a significant risk for us in Merseyside, because we could end up with our youth justice services bringing in a threshold and we don't engage with children in the future on first time POCDs. So that's probably a risk for us, because that's something I think we've been quite had to take a practical approach to, Fleur, haven't we? Because of the considerable workload on youth justice services. So they're the only ones that didn't go through a full assessment previously.
But the ones that Helen's talking about that go straight to, we've got Change, Grow, Live, there's different areas with different services, but whoever that substance misuse worker provider is, the ones that go straight to there are the ones that after checks and even YJS initial screening, so whether open to social care, that type of thing, previous ASB, they would go straight to substance misuse. Now, if we do have to include those in an initial assessment, one, it feels a bit like overkill. But 2, it's going to massively impact the numbers that we're working with, which I would hate for that to force a youth justice services hand to increase the threshold of the children that we take outside of that. And that's not diminishing the impact POCD, for us in Merseyside, it's generally cannabis, has on children and families and society. But if it's about looking at that balance, that's where it kind of needs to be. But I do know there is more than likely going to be that Merseyside-wide challenge, Helen. But again, it depends where that kind of falls. So yeah, valid point.
Thank you. So I've got a question that kind of relates to that. Like, we do know that when children can get swift referral, swift access to support through diversion, that it not only increases the likelihood of participation and engagement, but positive outcomes being achieved. Talk us through, like, generally what the timeline might be from kind of maybe a child coming into contact with the police to then working with maybe youth justice. What would that look like?
For an outcome 22,
Yes.
Operation Inclusion type thing?
Yes.
Okay, Helen, do you want to do the policey bit? Then I'll jump on to the YJSE bit.
And this is where it's how long is a piece of string. Our investigations are considerably challenged. Obviously, every phone's a computer now. So what might come through what looks straightforward as an outcome 22 case could still have been a really complex investigation. So it's really hard to say. Pick on the straightforward, the POCDs, like first time, they can be really swift, especially because we can use the body worn, we can do the voluntary attending interviews. We've brought in some protocols that supervisors, if it's really straightforward, out of court diversion, rather than it goes to a police decision maker, they can kind of hit our investigation, say it's suitable, and we can have cases come through quite quickly. But other times it can be really complex, what might be the same outcome. So it's really difficult, and we've had to put our hand up and say we've had a challenge to our investigations in Merseyside Police, a massive resourcing challenge. So that's improving for us because of the resources we put in, but that has affected some timelines through to Youth Justice. When Youth Justice bring them through, obviously we're looking at the trying to turn around in 20 working days for the assessment. Again, some resourcing challenges, it can slip, but we'll obviously rather keep a child. If they're not engaging at first, we'll try and keep it open a bit longer to try and bring them on board, because we know it's likely that sort of case is likely to come back from court anyway. But so we can be really swift, go through 6 weeks, one of the YGSs will keep a child doing outcome 22 for perhaps a good 12 weeks because the work's there to be done, and they've got the capacity to do it. So we can have variations there as well. So it can be very different, but one thing I would say regarding Operation Inclusion, for any police officers on the meeting today, there's voodoo dolls of me in Merseyside Police because the case stays open. We don't know the disposal yet, so can imagine that affecting timeframes for police investigations. We have to just keep saying, and our force crime registrar previously he was really supportive of us, but we have to say, you cannot close this. We do not know what's happening yet. It could be 3 to 6 months. So yeah, there's some challenges, but that's where my job is. I'm consistently going out, delivering guidance on it and explaining why. Yes, I appreciate you've got a crime still open, but you just need to hit your statutory duties of every month, doing the victim contact, doing the hitting our investigation log, and it's justifiable. It's not expeditious because of the officer, they've got it through to us. It's because of just the right processes we put in place. So just something to bear in mind from a police perspective. Fleur, I don't know if you can add any more about the Youth Justice, like taking them through.
Yeah, no, from the day that they hit YJS, they should be assessed and started intervention within the 20 days. Obviously, we are adopting child first principles, so some children we will take a little bit longer to get to know, that type of thing. There may be some resistance, so we try and be as flexible as we can be, but you can tell generally the difference between a child that's struggling to engage and perhaps we haven't yet understood that child enough to engage them as quickly as we would like, or a child who ain't going to engage no matter what the heck you do. So again, we will try and have those timeframes in mind, but obviously there are differences, and that happens, such as life, but also family circumstances as well can have a real impact, and where we are in the school year can also have an impact. It's all those type of things. So generally, solid rule of thumb, 20 working days. Then outside of that, it is very much the intervention that's created with the child and the family is based on their needs, their length of their specifically Operation Inclusion, as Helen said, can be anything from a couple of months up to 6 months, depending on their needs. And that's not to say if we put 6 months worth of intervention in and they finish it, we would look to reduce that time down if we felt it was required. But again, we've had it where kids have been open on op inclusion for 3 months and then don't want to finish their op inclusion on 3 months. And we're like, okay, shot ourselves in the foot massively here. What do we need to do to bolster that exit strategy for that child to feel confident to grow up into the world kind of without the support that they're getting? So yeah, I think that seamlessly marries up as well. But again, the relationship between the YJS and the police is key because of that strong, close working relationship. Helen and her YJS bobbies trust the interventions being delivered by the YJS. So if we say, Helen, this assessment's going to take longer than 20 days, okay, crack and give us another date, because they are aware of the lengths in which we go to try and engage that child and family. Because something that we're trying to move away from is that child doesn't engage. My way to flip that is, no, you're the professional. What are you doing to engage that child? which again, probably voodoo dolls of me. So me and Helen probably go along quite well there together. But it's that flipping it round. And sometimes there will be those children that we can't engage, but you need to try absolutely everything before you can say, can't engage them. So yeah, that's
Thank
it
you.
from me on
Thank you
that.
very much. And it seems like Helen's role is particularly important because one of the things we hear time and time again is people not being updated. In fact, some of the comments have been here is how do we ensure that information then is shared back with the police, and kind of that interagency working between the police and youth justice is key, particularly for outcome 22. So I was just going to, there's another question from Oliver, which is what percentage of youth cases are going through outcome 22 / Operation Inclusion in Merseyside? What percentage?
Okay. As I say, because of the challenges we're having with the data, I couldn't give you a confident percentage. What I can say quite confidently, across definitely Knowsley and more than likely Merseyside, there's a 50-50 split in youth justice caseloads of 50% on average is post-court, so sentenced at court. 50% is out-of-court disposals, so it's 50-50. I don't have the knowledge, the up-to-date knowledge to drill that down further in terms of the difference between community, because we have community resolution, outcome 22, community resolution, Operation Inclusion, YC, YCC. I feel like I've missed something there, Hal. That's it, isn't
Yes,
it?
so the disposal for Home Office, crime recording, outcome 22, community resolution, youth caution, youth conditional caution, and then obviously Operation Inclusion and the No Comment Pathway are programmes to then.
Within.
The only thing is, if it's a No Comment Pathway, it has to be the outcome 22, as
Yes.
you said. So for us, other areas, slightly much more, we're seeing more of a move to the out of court disposals because we've got Operation Inclusion. We give, like I say it's our extra string to our bow to go for more cases that we wouldn't have diverted previously. We cannot justify why we are diverting them. So we found the caseloads. One of our estate Helen specifically found the caseloads have specifically moved more into the out of court. In relation to the different outcomes, the outcome 22 NFA or deferred, we don't differentiate on our police systems at that. It's the outcome 22 for us. So I wouldn't be able to give you that data. And obviously police data is never, our police data is on a crime, not on the suspect, so it's the higher outcome. So what we have introduced to try and improve things from our recording is we've increased templates to use on, we use niche like a lot of other forces do, or we have templates for my officers. So they now we try to improve the buy-in of the police, but also to help recording and understanding for future child comes through again. So we use templates now to explain why a decision, what the decision was, why it was gained, what's the rationale. We add rationale. Some services are keen to give us even assessment documents, which I know with PAD is going to be more difficult now, because that's been really vital to help the police understand the needs of a child. It's also improved when they've had future police interactions with them, to understand how it can be difficult with certain neurodiversity. So we try to feed back with our templates a lot more why we got to that decision, what it was, and also what's going on with the child. It's not I hate the phrase, and this is what officers would normally say, it's just a yacht referral. It's not just a yacht referral, because the children that come in through to our youth justice services do a lot more work than the adults. A lot more work. The assessment in itself is some it's difficult and punishment for some, isn't it?
It is.
So we've definitely had to improve our recording to get the buy-in to explain to officers what's going on, and to improve that, and also for our scrutiny panel to make my life a lot easier when they can see really what's behind it. It's not just an outcome, it's what's behind it. So that's the difficult. We don't make any differences between the two outcome 22s, just the way it is. I think that was most of that for us. But everything of ours is literally like going to the panel and then the options are discussed. So we're really lucky with what we've got in place for our area, which I appreciate. That's probably why we've been able to deliver a lot easier, because of our youth justice not having a threshold.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question. It was posted much earlier on in the chat, and it's I'm going to pose it to Claire and Bami, but equally really keen for Fleur and Helen's reflections on this. So one of the questions, and we've received lots of emails about this from, individual officers saying my police force don't offer outcome 22, or specifically deferred prosecution or deferred caution, and I can imagine that is incredibly frustrating. Do you have any reflections from your point of view of how officers, teams can try and influence that in a force level. Yeah, keen for any views.
Yeah, and I get it, because it's, as you can hear from today and from the presentation from Bami, and then how it is quite a complex process to put in. You really need all your partnerships on board. You need a good, I guess, like diversionary and out of court resolution like ethos, a way of working already implemented. And if that isn't quite right as well, it makes this sort of deferred prosecution element quite difficult as well. But I think that the advice we give, I mean, the big thing is Home Office make a positive outcome and separate those outcome codes, because that will make everyone's lives easier. And I think more police forces will go for it, because it's that positive outcome that really holds them back.
Yeah.
But I also think there are so many forces now who are doing it, and it's not, and they are seeing it as a positive thing, and you can just learn from them. So I would just really encourage you to spend time with people like Merseyside or other areas that are doing this, and go and see what they're doing and learn from them, and say, look, they're doing it. It hasn't all fallen apart. The world hasn't gone, crazy in that area for them. And, it is achievable. And there are really good benefits for it. But I do think there is that real barrier for that positive outcome thing. And it's been an issue for how long now? I can't remember when we first were sort of calling for it. It's a long time. And I unfortunately, I think for some forces, until that's changed, they aren't going to move forward, and it is a real shame. But there is so much fantastic work out there, but it's just really hard to evidence, and really hard to for us to sort of, I guess, collate and codify all that practice when how it's recorded is not quite right. But I would suggest spend time with other forces and youth justice services that are doing brilliant work, and learn from them. You don't need to start from scratch, and everyone's really open with sharing what they've got, so just ask.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Before I hand over to Blair, can I just push on some of those forces, just in case you're another police force sitting here going, so obviously Merseyside are on the call, let's reach out to them. But any other forces you would say reach out to them, because they're doing good work around outcome 22.
So I'm anxious to sort of just put them all out there, because I haven't asked them if they'd be all right with it. I'm assuming they will, but please just contact us, and we can sort of organise those sort of introductions and meetings and stuff. Because and actually I put Fleur and Helen on the spot as well there by offering them out, so I probably shouldn't have done that either. But please just get in touch with myself or Barry, and we'll happily make those introductions, because otherwise they might get loads of emails and think, where is this?
Yes,
let's give them a bit of a heads up,
that's great. So Fleur, sorry, what were you going to add? So I'm keen for your reflections. If you're an officer or a force not doing outcome 22, anything you would add?
I would just kind of echo, I suppose, what Claire had said, but I do know Helen and I are getting more and more questions from different either youth. Helen, who were we on with the other week? I'm so sorry, that sounds awful.
I know there's recent discussions with Nottinghamshire, South Yorkshire, and Greater Manchester Police have been recent, but we're more than happy, especially with the virtual world. It's easy to have a meeting virtually, and we're more than happy to.
But we also do travel well.
Yeah, always happy to get out.
Always. But no, seriously, and I think it's about that. You may see some of the bits that Merseyside do that you think will work for your area, but then you see bits from another area, you go, actually, that will work better. And it's the amalgamation, because I think one of the biggest things that I've kind of learned coming from a world of youth justice is not everywhere is the same, and not everywhere should run the same. If we're looking to be child first in our approach to the children, then we need to base that in our geographical and socio-economical and political needs as well. So it's about keeping all of that in mind. But Helen, you won't know, I'm only joking. If there are anything, we are, again, I'm speaking for Helen and myself now, I'm going to away lots of cups of coffee here. But again, we will always try and get back to you, or kind of give you the right person to contact.
Helen.
One thing I'd suggest, obviously, because we come in very Merseyside centric here with our 5 youth justice services for youth, but there might be some, in other forces, there might be some opportunities to run it a bit like the adult world, the way our deferred prosecution scheme works with the adult world in relation to external agencies through Project Adder funding. I don't know, because we just very much stay away from that, and we're very separate to the out-of-court disposals for the adult world. So if you don't have the capacity within your youth justice services for this, it's something that could be, because our adult out-of-court diversions have gone through other voluntary sector workers, and then they've brought in their own administration systems to confirm that they've engaged with the diversion to get the outcome 22. So there might be possibilities in like to replicate from the adult world. It's just not something we've ever progressed because we're lucky with what we've got.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Sorry, Claire, was that an actual hand up?
Sorry. Just quickly, just on Helen's point as well, I think most youth justice services would jump at the chance to be involved in that outcome 22 stuff, to be honest, if in an area where they don't have it. So I think, yeah, if it's probably worth speaking to youth justice services as well, seeing what their capacity and what their ambition is obviously when you're coming up with it, like Helen said, because it is additional work, but I do think it does fit quite nicely with this diversionary and out of court space that youth justice services are already in and already experts in doing and
Without a
delivering.
shadow of a doubt, Claire, I think it is. And whilst it is initial work in terms of setting up, once it's set up, it just kind of flows. It's an initial period of, oh my God, this is new, da, 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 da. But then it just happens. We haven't seen an increase in numbers of children coming through. It's just a difference in the type of orders that they're getting. So I know that was one of the things that even in Merseyside we were all like, oh great, caseloads are going to go through. They didn't. There was that initial influx of, oh, we've got loads of these. With anything though, it dies down and cases haven't massively increased. We're just dealing with them differently.
Thank you, Fleur. So I'm going to take these two hands. So firstly, Oliver, if we can unmute so that Oliver can ask his question. Oh, the anticipation. Oh, there we go. Hopefully, Oliver, are you able to unmute now?
Good afternoon, colleague. I've been peppering you all with questions, so I've got one last one before the end. Is there any way we can evidence for other police forces and youth offending teams that might be looking at this? Is there any way that we can evidence a kind of an improvement in these children's lives, which is obviously what we're looking at, such as reduced criminal behaviour, improved educational attainment, improvements in mental or physical health? The thing we're struggling with is that no one seems to be counting anything. And if we can't actually evidence this, if we can't say less children are offending when we use an outcome 22 as compared to a youth caution, is it necessarily worth doing? We've got a lot of kind of anecdotal evidence that we're not seeing the kids coming back as often, but do we actually have any statistics anywhere that show any kind of improvement that anyone can share?
From a Merseyside perspective, I am fairly confident I will have that data once I get the data recording. So it's not so much the data recording, it's because I'm trying to collate it from 5 different areas who all work slightly differently on slightly different systems. So I don't have it as of yet. However, I am confident that when we do get it, we will see those positive outcomes. The issue is going to be we don't have the numbers of the YCCs, and that might be a Merseyside difference. So that might be the challenge, I suppose, but I'm hopeful and confident that we will see, in terms of offending following completion of an operation inclusion, that is reduced compared to other things. So once we do have that data, there will be some kind of press around that, definitely, for sure.
With relation to that, for those figures, if you're getting kind of outcomes, what are you comparing that to if you're not assessing the cases?
Sorry, if I'm not assessing the cases.
Yeah, there was a mention earlier about not doing an assessment for each case that's coming through.
So no, every child that's looked at for operation inclusion, which is the main one that we use in terms of outcome 22, has a full assessment.
Oh, right. So the ones that weren't being assessed, that was outcome
22. Simple first-time possession of controlled drugs, where we still had the ability to divert through youth justice, but it's because of the sheer quantity, whereas most youth justice wouldn't take. They have been taking them to deliver outcome 22, but it's the full assessment that's the issue for us. So I know most forces have process maps where they tell the officers to just issue community resolutions on the street, and then there's no interventions at all afterwards. So that's why we've done it differently. But I just feel that's pressure on us. We're now seeing that we're having to do assessments on all those first-time POCDs in youth justice. So that's probably my fear, that we'll have to introduce a threshold. And then those first time POCDs, where I think the most teachable, reachable moment for majority of our children are going to end up with just a police officer telling you off on the street that doesn't work. That's my
Right,
own
I see.
my own fear. But otherwise, everything else is full assessment, goes to the panel, screen to kind of like get an idea where you feel it is, and on the first week it comes in, goes off for the assessment, comes back, multi-agency panel makes a decision. And then it's obviously could be dependent on the decision, but if it's operation inclusion, you then go down the operation inclusion panel route, where you hold an initial panel, you set the contract like a referral order panel, you set that with the child, and then it carries on in a separate stance to then come back for the panel to decide to confirm the outcome, that they're happy with the engagement. So we've not deterred anyway in that way. We've just been trying to do a lot more with first time drugs that wasn't happening before.
Got it.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And happy to pick up the conversation, Oliver, because there's stuff that's YEF are doing in terms of data and considering future evaluation. So happy to pick up that conversation. Marianne, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to push you to 30 seconds, I'm afraid, because we've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I just wanted to add really, so I've been doing this since 2016 up until last year in practice. And to get, if your area, force area isn't using outcome 22, first thing, put a great business case together and take it to your management board, and then take it from that and collaborate with your police to start writing your policy. So 30 seconds, stop.
Oh, Marianne, that was incredible. Thank you. I like that concrete recommendation. So thank you. Right, that has been incredible. Hour and a half. I just want to say huge thank you to our speakers, Claire, Bammy, Fleur, and Helen. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences today. In terms of what we're doing, the session was recorded. We will be posting the recording with the slides onto our website. So check back in a couple of days. You'll be able to find the recording, which includes contact details if you did want to reach out to CGI or Merseyside colleagues. I'm sure they're going to expect quite a few contacts now. The final thing I was just going to say is this is part of a whole suite of online events that we run with the Centre for Justice Innovation. So again, check out future upcoming events that will focus on diversion and much more. Final thing to mention, we have a conference, a national conference on diversion coming up on the 10th of April. If you were to visit the Eventbrite page, it currently says that it is sold out. However, if there is more interest, we are happy to extend capacity. So please do either post here or get in touch and we will look at increasing capacity if we think that there is interest. But please do join us for what is, I'm sure, going to be a fantastic day. Final thing, as Yanina has just posted into the chat, please do take a couple of moments to share feedback. We're always looking at ways that we can improve, but also celebrate successes. So please do share your feedback with us. And that finishes on 2:30. So thank you so much to everyone who took the time to join us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.